Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Sotah, Daf Lamed Gimel. Text. Thanks for being the class monitor. Appreciate it. We're on the top of Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph, and we're starting 8 lines down at the 2 dots. Yesterday's blot from the beginning of this new parak, we were discussing what things can be done in any language and what things can be done only in Hebrew. One of the many things that we had listed that can be done in any language was tefillah, saying Shmona Esrei, which is very helpful. When I used to work in NCSY, this was a refrain. Daven in any language that you want, no problem at all. So it says the Gemara, tefillah, why is it that we're allowed to daven in any language? Because rachamehi, tefillah is rachamin. And whenever a person wants, they should be able to daven. They used to say of the Brisker Rav that because it was a mitzvah d'oraisa to daven every time that you are in pain, he used to whisper under his breath, even in the midst of conversation, I'm waiting for your salvation, to be Mekayim the mitzvah d'oraisa. He happened to have said it in Hebrew, but when you're in pain, you can say things in English. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows all languages, and that is appropriate. Says the Gemara, wait one second, not every language works with tefillah b'chol lashon. You can't daven Shmona Esrei in every language because we know that at least one language is off limits. A person should not speak in Aramis. The Malachi Asharis, they don't comprehend. So this Bichlal is a Shiloh. What do we need the Malachi Asharis for? This is the song we sing, Machnise Rachamim, Hichnise Rachamim. And some of the Farshim don't like that paragraph. What do you mean Machnise Rachamim? We don't have a go-between when we daven. So this is already a tumult in the Mefarshim. So that says the Gemara, you said we can daven in every language. That's not true because Lashon Aramis is a language that you cannot daven in. Says the Gemara, an incredibly important yesod. Lo kasha, habi yachid, habi tzibur. The difference is that when you're davening b'yachid, then we are more restrictive because we don't have the weight of the tzibur to carry our tefillos up to the heavens. But when you daven b'tzibur, doesn't matter what happens. Aramis, English, Hebrew, Russian, Latin, doesn't matter. Because of the koach of the tzibur, everything pierces up to the heavens. So this is a very important yesod. Sometimes we, should I go to the minyan today? Should I not? You could ask that as a halachic question all you want. But if you're looking for impact, you got to daven b'tzibur because that's really what carries the weight. Says, by the way, P.S., I daven mincha at home today, big musar. But I will tell you that I had to decide between, my wife's out of town, I had to decide between my son going to night seder, but then being home for me to babysit, or telling him not to go to night seder so I could daven mincha b'tzibur. So I'm like, I will daven tefillah b'yachid, no problem at all. It's a comfortable, calculated decision. I daven mincha at home so my son could learn a daf Gemara for an hour in shul. And I asked him, and my son said to me, I don't want to miss tonight. It's an important night. I'm like, okay, whatever. I'll daven every tefillah at home. It's fine. So this is a big yesod, and in halachic literature, these are not things we typically publicize too much. But in halachic literature, to daven b'chidus isn't the biggest crime in the world. So that's not how we have to look at it. We have to look at it as the power of tefillah b'tzibur. Says the Gemara. Wait one second. Vein malachi asharis makirin b'lashon arami. The premise of your question is that Aramis was a language that isn't included in tefillah, even though we responded to it. But that assumes that the Malachi Asharis don't know Arami. That's not true. Tanya, the Brisa writes. Yochanan Kohen Gadol Shama Baskol Mibeis Kodesh HaKodashim Shomer Nitzchu Talia. The sheep have won, reference to the Jewish people, in an army. To Azlu La'agcha Krava Le'Antuchya. They went to go fight with Antuchya, whatever the context is, but that was in Aramaic. That came straight out of heaven. He too heard voices coming out of the Kodesh HaKodashim. And the Baskol was Shu Omer B'Tela Savidta. We have canceled out the army. Which army? The one that was the Amar Shana La'isa al Hechla, the one who had hatred toward the Hechal, the Neira Gaskalgas, Uvitlug Zeros, of this person, Gaskalgas, who was a very bad person. I don't know who he was. And Mevatlas Xeros. V'chasvu Osa Shah V'kivnu, and he wrote down right when this happened. Now, what do we see from here? You're saying you can't daven in heaven. That seems to be the language of the Baskol. The heaven's talking in Aramis. What do you mean the Malachim don't understand it? That's the language that they were talking in. So says the Gemara, you could either say that a baskol is different. Of course, that's an oddball form of communication, and therefore, because it's so unique, you have to leave it alone. You can't learn anything from there. It has to be in a language where the recipients can understand, and the lashon of the land at that time was Aramis. No, maybe it was only Gabriel. Gabriel was the one who knew all the languages. Damar Mar Bar Gabriel Velimdu Shivim Lashon. He knew all the languages. One way or the other, we should try to make sure to daven in a minyan wherever possible. And if we daven in the tzibur, it doesn't matter what language we speak in. And if we daven in biyachidus, we should try not to daven b'lashon Aramis. We had said Birkas Hamazon can be said in any language. That's very nice, and we could understand logically why that's true, but we need a Mari Makom. Why is it that benching is allowed to be said in any language? If you're going to be mevarich, how do you give blessings? So some people say, God bless you. Whatever it is. If that's your lashon b'nei adam, if that's the way you talk, that's a mutter way to bench.
There's no Aramis restriction on benching?
Benching is not a lashon Aramis. Oh, you're saying can you
bench in Aramis?
It's probably this. I would imagine it's the same overlay of dialogue from before, that it depends on how you understand the Gemara. But either way, there should be a concern, because there is no din of tzibur. I guess maybe by zimun, if you have a ka, if you have 10, that's a tzibur.
It's more like if you have. Nobody says you got to go looking.
No, but it's just right. But if you have, but that would be the same nafkamina, which is that if you have 10 people, then in theory, if you wanted to bench in Aramis, you could, according to Texas approach, and otherwise you would not be able to. Good question. I have no idea. I don't know. Big Toast was there, but I don't know what he's talking about. What about Shua Sa'idus, when a person makes a testimony that they don't know something? And anything that your ear can hear, that's how we know that the Shua Sa'idus can be made in any language. There's a Gzeir Shava, that's how we know that Shua Sa'pikadon can be said in any language. This is a little bit of an odd presentation. The Gemara here quotes like 3 lines from the Mishnah that we saw. Let's read it. This is a quote from the Mishnah that we learned at the beginning of the parak on Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. These have to be in Hebrew, Mikra Bikurim v'Chalitza v'Chulei, ad Mikra Bikurim Ketzad, and we're going to quote that Mishnah until this piece, which says, how do we know about Mikra Bikurim, that it has to be in Hebrew? Remember we said yesterday, Anisa and Amarta, the double language, that's what causes for the lashon to be in Hebrew. So that's the end of the quote from the Mishnah from yesterday. And on that, the Gemara asks, hey, wait 1 second. What's the Mari Makom that the Levim, right? The pasuk says, how do we know that they were b'lashon hakodesh? Says the Gemara, Asya kol mi Moshe v'gzeir shavak sifacha kol ram u'sifasa Moshe daber v'elkim yanenu v'kol malhalim b'lashon hakodesh avkam b'lashon hakodesh. So by the Levim, we had a gzeir shava from the word kol that teaches us that it has to be in Hebrew, even by the case of bikurim. In our Mishnah, we had a machlokes about chalitza. If you look back at our Mishnah, the last short line in the Mishnah on Lamed Beis Amud Aleph told us that by chalitza there was a machlokes. The first approach that was a gzeir shava of anu v'amru, and the second approach was shitas Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda had said v'ansa v'amra kacha, that the pasuk says kacha, and therefore that's how we know that it has to be only in Hebrew. So this machlokes tanaim is what we're discussing now. Says the Gemara v'Rabbanan, according to the Tanakama, who learned that chalitza has to be in Hebrew from the Gzeir Shava. Okay, haikacha my agdile. What does he do with the pasuk that Rabbi Yehuda used? Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that we learned that a chalitza has to be in Hebrew from the word kacha. Very good, very good. But what do the Rabbanan do with that? If the Rabbanan learn it from somewhere else, the word kacha is available. Says the Gemara, no, any active parts of chalitza are by definition ma'akev, the removal of the shoe, the spitting on the ground. Rashi details the rikika. All of those things are ma'akev, and he learns that from the word kacha. Rabbi Yehuda, what about that? Rabbi Yehuda, if the Chachamim are learning out that Kacha teaches us the Davar Ma'asim Ma'akev, how do you know that the Ma'asim are Ma'akev if you use Kacha for something else? Says the Gemara, because the pasuk could have said something different. Rabbi Yehuda, it could have said Miko, but it didn't. It said Kacha, and therefore we know L'Davar Ma'asim Ma'akev. Now both of them are on the same page, just with different Mari Makomos in regards to L'Davar Ma'asim Ma'akev. That according to everybody, if any of the actions of the Bar Chalitza are missing, the Chalitza is a 0. You can't skip any steps. The Rabbanan koko lo mishmalahu ko kacha. Excuse me. The Rabbanan say that this drasha of ko and kacha, they don't worry about it because that's not a drasha that was worthwhile. Even though there is an extra letter of chaf, So this has to do with methodologies in understanding things, which is that, yes, there might have been a shorter way to write it, but seemingly the Rabbanan weren't concerned about ko and kacha. Again, it's like kind of Lashon B'nai Adam-esque type of concerns. When I was in YU, I took a course called Bible study, something like that. I can't remember what it was called. And the teacher there painted mahalchim and methodology of Rashi versus the Radak versus the Rashbam from themes. He would pull 20 Rashis from throughout Tanakh, and he would show Rashi thinks like this. And he would pull 20 shitas of the Radak and say that the Radak thinks like that. So here also you begin to see insights. The Rabbanan, we're not worried about the extra letter. So yes, we're analytical, but we don't take every letter. Sometimes an extra letter is acceptable without drasha. That brings us to the top of Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis. Now, Rabbi Yehuda, who said that the reason that we know that chalitza has to be in Hebrew is from the pasuk of Kacha. Okay, that's great. What does he do with the Gzeira Shavah pasukim of Ansa v'Amra? So it says the Gemara, that's used for something else. That's used to teach us that the Leviim, that whenever they do their avoda, the work that they do, that it has to be in Hebrew. So it says the Gemara, that's great, but why didn't you learn from Moshe? Call me Moshe. We already saw in the beginning of this Gemara that we had a Gzeira Shavah of Kol Moshe to teach us that there's something that was also Lashon HaKodesh. The Gemara says, Tanya Nami Hachi, the Brisa writes this way, sorry, I skipped a line. V'leilav kol mi Moshe, we can't, because Aniya Gamir, Kol Lo Gamir. This is very important rule to know about Gzeira Shava. You need to have a Mesorah. So he had the Gzeira Shava of Aniya and Aniya Gamir, that he had a tradition, but Kol, that one, he did not have a tradition on that one. So this is an important principle. If we go to the Chumash and we say, it says bara over here and bara over there, I'm going to make my own Gzeira Shava, you're a shegitz. That's not, no, these things are above our pay grade. They're not just complicated, they're Gzeira Shava is one of the Yud Gimel Torah Midosh Torah Dresha. We were not allowed to paskin on these things. So we were not allowed to do that. So here we see that according to Rabbi Yehuda, he didn't have both drashas. He only had one drashas of the Gzeira Shava. And Tanya Nami Hachi, the Brisa writes accordingly. Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, 4 lines down. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kol Makom Shneimar Ko Kacha Aniya ve'Amira. These 4 lashonos always indicate Enu Ella Lashon HaKodesh. This teaches us about Lashon HaKodesh. How do we know this? Well, Ko is Kosiv Baruchu, that's Birchas Kohanim, which we already detailed in our Mishnah, has to be in Hebrew. Kacha is Dechalitza, that's the language that we have in our pasuk. That this is clearly Rabbi Yehuda, because the Rabbanan don't say that Kacha teaches that to us. That only teaches us something else, that you can't skip any steps in the Maisa Chalitza. When it says Aniya ve'Amira, that's Delavim, and that we saw on the top of this page, that's how Rabbi Yehuda learns that. Now we had said brachos seklalos ketzad kev and Shabbat Yisrael seyarden v'chulei, the whole story of Har Grizim and Har Eval. Yesterday we painted a picture of where people were located. You had 6 Shvatim on the right, 6 Shvatim on the left, the Aaron in the middle, the Kohanim in the next concentric ring, the Levim in the next concentric ring. They'd all look at one mountain and say Baruch this. Everyone would say Amen. They'd all turn around and look at the other mountain and say Arur that. Everyone would say Amen. Back and forth till they finished all the brachos on the clothes. And in our Mishnah, we left it b'pashtas that we actually knew where this location was. It did seem very clear. It was right over the Yarden. It seemed very clear. It's right next to Shechem, Elon Emor. It's actually a big machlokas in the Tanaim here as to where the mountains are. Do we know where Har Grizim and Har Eval are? We do? Yeah? We've been there.
I mean, we're pretty sure. The valley is there between. One side is lush, looking like crazy.
This is right over the Jordan? Right over the Yarden?
Pretty close to the Jordan. It's very close to Shechem, back when it wasn't such a big deal to go there.
That's very interesting. All right.
I can't tell you for sure.
But this Gemara, when you read this Gemara, I want you to play with your memory a little bit, because this Gemara is fascinating. It paints 2 different pictures as to where we were talking about. So it says the Gemara. Yeah. But if you were you in eye shot of the Yarden, like it was very close? Okay.
And Yarden today is very, very narrow. So
that's a very good point. Okay, so let's see what the Gemara says here. Michael's falling apart. He's not falling asleep.
Go to the mountains, take a bunch of Christians. They go to these mountains and actually do them at the blessed elders. But if I remember correctly, up on one of them, they were they were like, let's go.
Wow.
Yeah.
I hope that wasn't one of the klalos. It was that would not be good to violate one of the klalos on Har Grizim and Har Eval.
Oh, Jewish.
I know.
The Samaritans, I think. Exactly.
Okay, I don't even know what that means. So right at the 2 dots, 10 lines down on Lamed Gimel, the Gemara paints a big machlokes, a machlokes tanaim about the location that we're talking about. Tanu Rabbanan, Halohema be'ever hayardain. It's me'ever layardain ve'elech. It's not just across, but it's far away from the Yarden. It's a farther walk. D'Rav Yehuda. Acharei derech mavua shemesh makom shechama zorachas. It's east. It's east and away from that place. Again, I don't even know how to do this because what they were crossing. Wait, which way did they cross?
West.
Yes, it has to be because they went towards Shem. It has to be. It has to be. Anyways, they went far. They went far away, but they were someplace that was Makom Shechama Zorachas, which was eastbound. The pasuk then says, "Be'eretz haknei yoshe ba'arava elu har grizim har eval sheyoshvim bahem kusim." They didn't live there at that time, but the kusim, which is always
might be these guys.
We don't even know who they are. They very well. I mean, probably not been on. Yeah. Oh, I have a great bris story from today. I have to. Okay, let's just get through them. Okay, Har Grizim. By the way, when you think of Har Grizim and Har Eval, and then you're like, "Oh, I have a great bris story," it's usually a bad combo. It's usually a bad combo. So that's where the Kusim live. Then Mul Ha Gilgal, Samuch Le Gilgal, and the Mefarshim here. This Gemara is very difficult because the Gemara says Samuch Le Gilgal, and the Rishonim say it wasn't Mamish Samuch. It was just that it was within a visual line of sight.
And why would you say Mul if it's some?
Your question's better than my answer, but that's what the Rishonim say over here, that they were not Mul Gilgal, or opposite.
If it comes out Elone Mora and Gilgal are not near each other, then it can only be one or the other.
So it says the Gemara, Eitzel Elone Moreh, that's Shechem. Okay. And Ulahalun Omer Vayaver Avram Ba'aretz Ad Makom Shechem Ad Elon Moreh Ma Elon Moreh Ha'amur Lahalan Shechem Afkan Shechem. Even if you want to say that Elon Moreh was two multiple cities, doesn't matter. It was all near Shechem. So Shechem from the water was a significant distance from the Yarden. Tanya, the Brisa writes, Some Rabbi Elazar B'Reb Yossi. But Davar Zeh, in this Nekuda of Elon Moreh and Shechem, Ziyafti Sifrei Kusim. I was able to invalidate. I called out a forgery on a Sefer Torah that was written by the Kusim. These were some kind of people who were literalists. I've come across them in the circumcision world. They call themselves Hebrew scripturalists, and they are mamish. Whatever is written in Chumash, they keep, which once you've learned one daf of Gemara, you then know you understand nothing in Chumash, because we were just discussing, is kacha and ko, can you be dorei shachav? These guys are like, we've got pshat, don't worry, we figured it all out. So it's the worst form of amaratzos. You know nothing and you think you know something. We know something and we know that we know nothing. We're exactly on the opposite end of the spectrum. But these Kusim thought they had it all down, but they made a mistake. When they were copying over the Torah, they wrote Elonei Moreh, and then they added the word Shechem, which is not in Chumash. So that's what Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov, but Rabbi Yossi was dealing with. Amarti lehem, I said to these forgers, Ziyaftem Toraschem, you messed up your Torah. V'lo ha'elisem b'yedchem klum, and what's left? Nothing. It's a bunch of quill and wasted ink. She'atem omrim, the pasuk says, quote Elonei Moreh Shechem. I agree with you in content, but when you're copying over onto your scrolls, you made a mistake. But anu lemadnuha b'gzera shava. We learned this out, Elonei Moreh over here, and Elonei Moreh over there, gzera shava. That's how we know what Elonei Moreh is. But you don't believe in that. Atem b'mel lemadatum. You had no way to ever learn out Shechem. The raya that you're a shegitz and you made a Sefer Torah that's worth nothing, zero. You have no way to know that. Okay. I did a bris for a family that were Koraim. They were carrots, like exist today. But they had their own traditions. Isn't that a stira? They weren't wearing tefillin, but they were not from enough to wear tefillin. But they were Karaites who had customs. I don't understand how you can have a custom if you're a Karaite. Doesn't that mean that you're just a Chumash Jew? You're just whatever it says in the Bible. What color was your skin? Wow, Caucasian, super educated, both doctors, super educated. They played a whole video from a Karaite website during the bris, music playing in the background. Maybe it was a yid, got a bracha b'shem u'malchus. So weird. Okay, I hope you're not listening. Okay. They're probably Daf Yomi, very unlikely. Okay, let's continue. All of this was approach number one. that this location of Har Gerizim, Har Eval was at a distance from the Jordan River. Halfway down, Rabbi Elazar Amar, no. Elohim be'ever Yarden, Samuch li'Yarden, V'im ever li'Yarden ve'elech, Haloksiv v'hil b'ovrachem es ha'Yarden. It was all in one day. They all crossed. It was all that day. Much can you walk in a day with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people? Gosh, you could try walking through the airport with 3 people. It's a headache. There's no way they got that far. Also, it says, Acharei derech mevo hashemesh. No, that's a language of makom she'acham hashokas, where the sun sets in the west. So they must have been just settled. The sun was setting to the west of them by the water. Okay, it all should be right there. It says, Gemara, wait 1 second. Eretz HaKanani, if you're saying that it's close to the Jordan River, that's not Eretz HaKanani, that's Eretz Chivi. You got the wrong parcel of land. Also, it says Hayoshev Ba'arava. That's not true. It wasn't a flat plain. V'halo bein har mugvos hein yoshvin. Can't be on a flat plain. It has to be in a valley between 2 mountains. That's what we're talking about. What is Mul HaGilgal? V'halo roes HaGilgal. They were far away from Gilgal at this particular location. If you're too close to the Jordan, it says the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer. Which one is this? Ben Yaakov? I already forgot. Ben Yossi. Rabbi Yossi, Omer, no. We're only talking about the right way to cross the river. What does this mean? Derech b'derech lechu. You should walk on regular paths. And when you're doing these, when the Jewish people are traveling, you should not walk through people's fields. Hayoshev, it doesn't mean Yoshev in a particular city. It means b'yishuv lechu. You should walk in established, settled communities. If you can avoid walking in the desert, you should. Civilization, give a little bit of money to the locals, fine. It's better to walk on the plains than it is to walk up and down mountains. Okay, so big machlokas in the Tanaim as to what the location. It says Gemara Tana Rabbanan, Keitzad Avru Yisrael Es HaYarden. How did the Jews cross over the Jordan? Bechol Yom, every day, 10 lines from the bottom. We're going to stop at the last word on the page. Bechol Yom Aron Nosea Achar Shnei Dgalim. The Aaron would travel after 2 Shvatim, after 2 of the Dgalim. The Hayom Nasat Chila. On the day that they crossed the river, the Aaron went first. Shnei Emar Hine Aaron Habris Adon Kol Aretz Over Lifnechem. It's in front of everybody. There's no flags in front of it. Bechol Yom Vayom. In general, the way that it would work is that Levim Nos Nesa Aaron. The Hayom Nesa'u Kohanim. In general, the Levim would carry, we know they didn't actually carry the Aron from Tanakh. We know those stories. People tried to carry the Aron. Kadosh Baruch Hu killed people for that. Don't do that. And today the Kohanim are carrying Kohanim Nosi Aron Hashem, a rare form. Usually it's Levim, but on the day they crossed the Jordan, the Kohanim were carrying it. And the Gemara concludes with a short brisa, 3 lines. Tanya. Rabbi Yossi Omer b'shloshim mekomos nasa Kohanim es Aron. There are 3 times, and only 3 times seemingly, that the Kohanim would carry the Aron. What were the 3 times? Kshavras hayarden. That was number 1, when the Kohanim carried the Aron. Number 2, Kshehisibu es Yericho, the famous story when they walked around Yericho and the walls all collapsed. Uchshechziru limekomo, and whenever it was being put back in its place. And if you take a look at Rashi for a brief historical note, Rashi says 5 lines, 6 lines from the bottom. Uchshechziru limekomo b'mei Shlomo lebeis kodshei hakodashim d'chsiv evo kol zeknei Yisrael v'yisum hakohanim es ha'aron. They are the ones who put it back. We'll stop right here, pick up in Mir Hashem tomorrow with yet another blot. Wishing you all a beautiful night.